Here we are in round 3 of our get-together, and as promised, we do have Jim Marrs with us, who has authored Rule by Secrecy, the hidden history that connects the Trilateral Commission, the Freemasons, and the Great Pyramids. And what intrigues me about having Mr. Marrs here as a guest and talking about this particular book is over the years in doing the Bob Grant radio program, I have gotten telephone calls intermittently, but nevertheless consistently, from people who talk about the Trilateral Commission in these sinister tones. Let's find out, first of all, who Jim Marrs is. He's described by his publisher, HarperCollins, as a celebrated journalist and the author of Alien Agenda and the New York Times bestseller Crossfire. And you live in Texas. Mr. Marrs, how long have you been working on this book?
Well, I guess it's safe to say that I've been working on it most of my professional life. In fact, I wished I'd have had this book about 25 years ago or so when I first heard of the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderbergers. And I, like probably a lot of your audience, was wondering, well, number one, do these things really exist? And number two, do they really have any power?
Well, the trouble is, as I see it, people call the program and they talk as though it's absolutely fearsome. Are you afraid of this conglomeration, this conspiracy, as you put it?
Well, not particularly, because anything that has to operate in secrecy can be exposed by the light of knowledge and media attention.
All right, let's do some exposure here and give it the media attention. Who are these people? Are they connected?
Yes. We'll just go backwards. We've got the Bilderbergers, which is so secret that they don't even have a name. It was named after the Hotel Bilderberg, where they were first found to be meeting annually back in 1954. They are the inner circle of cross-membership with the Trilateral Commission, which was founded in 1972 by David Rockefeller and 7 other members of the even more secretive Council on Foreign Relations. And they were both offshoots of the Cecil Rhodes Round Tables, which was a secret organization taking place back before World War I. And, of course, Cecil Rhodes not only left money to found these secret societies, as he himself stated in his will, but, of course, he left money for the Rhodes Scholarship, of which Bill Clinton, our president, was one of them.
Is this the same Cecil Rhodes named for which Rhodesia was named?
I believe so. He was the diamond magnate of Africa.
Okay, now Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm.
What's the point of this organization? What are they after?
Well, first, let's I call them secret societies because you and I can't walk in off the street and become a member, and by their own bylaws and guidelines and regulations, they're not supposed to talk about what they discuss in their meetings. So it's pretty secret. But actually, it's not that secret. They're in the phone book. They have an office right here in New York. So does the Trilateral Commission. Their agenda is not all that secret either. They are pushing for globalization, which is a one world military, one world government, one world political system, one world economy, one world monetary system. And in fact, I would quote from Strobe Talbert, who is President Clinton's Deputy Secretary of State. Back in '92, he told Time magazine, in the next century, meaning today, nations as we know it will be obsolete. All states will recognize a single global authority. National sovereignty wasn't such a great idea after all.
I know that Strobe Talbot said that, and I have read that quote elsewhere. But how do you tie that in with this Trilateral Commission?
Well, Strobe Talbot is a big member of the Council on Foreign Relations. I don't know if he's a member of the Trilateral Commission or not, but I thought that was a pretty straightforward vocalization of their game plan. They want this one world government, one world military, and I'm not a real reactionary. I'm not even going to try to say, oh, this is terrible. You ask me if I'm afraid of it. I'm not sure, but I have some questions because, number one, if this total one world or government or the new world order, as people have called it, if that's such a good thing, if that's the path to peace and prosperity, then why is it so secretive? Why are they manipulating in the shadows? Why are they pushing this agenda through organizations like the World Trade Organization and all like that? And that leads, of course, to my basic question, which is, if they attain a one world government, a one world order, what is our guarantee that some new Hitler-like tyrant won't gain control over that?
Well, we don't have a guarantee in any event, even if we don't have a one world government. Look what this president has been doing with all his executive orders, with people being audited if they complain that they were raped by the president.
That's right. And where does this president come from? He comes right out of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderbergers. Even Hillary Clinton has been the first American First Lady to attend a Bilderberger meeting. So they are integrally intertwined with this new world order, and that's what I'm saying. They're pushing it not through laws enacted by our elected representatives, but through trade agreements and presidential orders.
All right, there's so much to cover here, and I certainly don't want to leave our audience out of this. And by the way, you folks, you can start calling. I guarantee you I'm not going to hog Mr. Mars all to myself, although I have hundreds of questions that are dancing through my mind right now. Why do you link the Trilateral Commission with the Freemasons?
Well, because the Trilateral Commission, as I said, is clearly an offshoot of the Council on Foreign Relations, which was, again, created by the people that were members of Cecil Rhodes Roundtables, and they were all Freemasons. In fact, they were illuminated Freemasons.
What is a Freemason? A lot of people hear the word and they really don't know. Could you give us a definition of what a Freemason is?
Well, I think there are probably as many definitions of Freemasonry as there are Freemasons, but what I can tell you is that the Freemasons were the creations and stemmed from the old stonemason guilds back during the Middle Ages, and they were created by another secret society, the world's first and foremost
the Illuminati?
No, the Knights Templar.
The Knights Templar, yes.
Right. Now, the Illuminati came along in the 1700s, and their game plan was a graduated income tax, a destruction form read very, very similarly to the Communist Manifesto that was published in the mid-1800s by Karl Marx.
True or false, Mr. Mars, many of our founding fathers were Freemasons.
True. George Washington was a leading Freemason. In fact, in Freemasonry text and writings, they claim that the Boston Tea Party was actually conducted by Masons who had just left a Masonic meeting at the temple there in Boston.
And what do Freemasons believe, or don't you know?
Well, that's what I discuss in my new book, Ruled by Secrecy, and there's a lot of controversy about that because, for one thing, according to Masonic authors and historians, there are circles within circles. There is an outer circle of Freemasons who probably are in there for the most noble of purposes, and there's no question that they do a lot of philanthropic good. Their burn centers are world-renowned, but within that, there's an inner circle that has perhaps another agenda, but we'll never really learn about that because the outer circle is unaware that the inner circle exists, and the inner circle is pledged to an oath that they will never reveal. So if you ask a Mason, is there an inner circle, he will tell you no.
Mr. Mars, I mean no disrespect, and you seem like a delightful, knowledgeable individual. You certainly speak very well. No disrespect intended, but somehow or other I feel as though I'm in an episode of The X-Files.
Well, I've heard that The X-Files has been said to be the best documentary on television. I'll have to admit that for years as a print journalist, I had severe doubts and questions about all of this. Are there really secret groups? Do they really plot to try to start
when you talk about
wars?
Circles within circles within circles, I mean, it's...
Well, I'm simply, in my book, it's not my conspiracy theory. I quote from the Masonic historians themselves, and they all freely admit to that.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've just tuned in, we're talking to Jim Marrs, who touches on a subject that many callers of the Bob Grant program over the years have suggested without perhaps having the knowledge that our guest obviously has. And if you want to join in, it's very easy. You don't have to come running down to the studio. All you have to do is pick up the telephone and dial 1-800-321-8828, 1-800-321-8828. And when we return after our quick break coming up, I want to ask our guest, Jim Marrs, what he means when he includes the Great Pyramids as part of this great mystery. Straight ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Grant here, and our guest is Jim Marrs. He is a journalist. He is an author. He has written a book which has just been published by HarperCollins called Ruled by Secrecy, subtitle, The Hidden History That Connects the Trilateral Commission, the Freemasons, and the Great Pyramids. All right, now what about the Great Pyramids?
Yeah, how does that fit in? Well, just to show that we're not talking about something that has no connection to all of us, I would just simply say that all your listeners, all they have to do is pull a dollar bill out of their pocket, look on the reverse side, and you'll see the Great Seal of the United States, and it has a pyramid on it with the all-seeing eye of knowledge at the top, and under, in Latin, it says Novus Ordo Seclorum, which can be translated as New World Order. And that's because America was a new world order from the royal systems of Europe, and these are the same people who are now pushing for the new world order of today. And the connection to the Great Pyramid is simply through the secret societies, which the information has been passed through Freemasonry and back to the Knights Templar, who discovered the writings under the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem back at the time of the First Crusade, which takes us back to the ancient mysteries of Greece and Egypt. And that's why the pyramid is on there, representing not only the ancient mysteries, but the fact that the eye of the all-seeing knowledge is at the top of a pyramid of power, which means that within these secret societies, there are an elite who have this ancient mystery and this ancient knowledge. And what is that? Well, Walter Wilhelmhurst, who is a Masonic author and historian, said that once men were taught and guided by the gods, okay? And that another one, Manly P. Hall, who was a ranking Mason, he has expounded on that a little bit. He said in the remote past, the gods walked with men, and they chose from among the sons of men the wisest and the truest, and these illumined ones founded what we know as the ancient mysteries.
What does all this have to do with the year 2000 and why we should be concerned about the Trilateral Commission, the CFR, the Bilderbergers? You know, and again, this is not meant as criticism of you.
No, that's legitimate.
But the fact
questions.
of the matter is, most Americans didn't study history. They hated history. I was considered an oddball because that was my favorite subject. But you cover so much here. You're talking about the French Revolution. You talk about the Jacobins. And you're also talking about the Protocols of Zion, which is usually trotted out by anti-Semites.
That's true. That particular book has probably caused more problems than nearly any other book in history. And let's quickly put this to rest. The Protocols of Elders of Zion was a remake of an earlier text, which was remade before World War I by the Tsar's secret police to try to make it look like that the revolution that was then brewing in Russia was the result of some sort of international Jewish conspiracy. And there are still those today who adhere to that idea, but it's nonsense, because you cannot ascribe any worldwide plot to a group of people. That would be like saying Hitler and the Nazis was some sort of white plot.
And yet you're saying that what you're talking about in your book is a worldwide plot.
But it's a plot by people who transcend races or groups of people or businesses or anything else.
What do they have in common?
They have in common the desire that's been here since the beginning of time, which is to basically control the world. Now, some people would say, oh, that's negative, and some people would say, well, that's positive. Perhaps we need somebody to control the world.
You know, the way things are going in the United States of America, I'm beginning to think that way myself. Let's take a phone call because we've got so many people waiting and wanting to talk to you, and let's open up Pandora's box right now. Paul in the car, go right ahead for Jim Mars.
Bob, I'm a Freemason, and I just want to give you 4 sentences that tell you what a Mason is for your listeners who are listening to this hogwash. Okay?
By the way, they're also seeing it because this is going to be shown on C-SPAN.
Oh, wonderful. Every Freemason asserts his belief in God and the immortality of the soul, believes that how he worships God is his own business. Therefore, he believes fervently in freedom of religion, is aware that religion and politics are often used to drive men apart. They may not be discussed in any Masonic lodge. And he never puts his duties and responsibilities to Masonry ahead of his duties and responsibilities to his God, to his family, or to his country.
All
and
right,
that's what Masonry is all about.
All right. Now, what do you say to that, Jim Mars? That doesn't sound ominous.
No, it doesn't. And in fact, again, let me make the point that I think the great majority of Masons are honest, well-meaning, well-intentioned people. But if you go back and really study your history, you'll find that the Jacobites were the people who wanted to put James I back onto the throne of England, and that it was Freemasonry that was used as a political weapon to try to accomplish that end. I'd also again quote from Masonic author Wilhelmshurst, who wrote The Meaning of Masonry, and he said, the meaning of Masonry is a subject usually left entirely unexpounded, and that accordingly remains largely unrealized by its members, save such few as make it their private study.
Let's take another call very quickly. Ernie in the car, go right ahead with Jim Mars.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you a question. Wasn't it one time if you were a Roman Catholic and joined the Masonic order, you were excommunicated? Is that true?
That is true. And that was because that the beginning of Freemasonry, again, originated with the Knights Templars, the world's first giant multinational corporation that became so powerful that they were exterminated, or at least they were tried to be exterminated by the Roman Church.
Yeah.
But didn't they rescind that later on?
Yes, you're not going to be excommunicated now, so I'll see you at the lodge meeting tonight. Okay? All right. Let's see, I don't think we have time to take another call before our next break. We're talking to Jim Mars, and we've got calls coming in from all over. Let's go to Bob checking in. Bob from Thornwood. Go right ahead, Bob.
Hello, Bob.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Bob, don't you think it would be fair if you told the gentleman that your father is a Mason and that you're quite knowledgeable? And I've heard you speak very eloquently in defense of the Masons.
Well,
I think the gentleman should know that.
Well, there's no big secret here. My father was a Mason. He's shuffled off this mortal coil quite a long time ago.
Well, just for the record, my father was a Mason, and my grandfather was a Mason.
So
and I'm not trying to attack the Masons. I've already said 3 times, I'll say it again. Most Masons, the vast majority of Masons in this country are good, honest, honorable people trying to do the best they can for their country.
I understand. But listening as I am now, you would think that Bob had very little knowledge of Masonry. And in another
Are you implying?
And in another broadcast about a year ago, Bob was very, very knowledgeable about things pertaining to Masonry.
Well, I wasn't interviewing Jim Mars, who's written a book and who includes Freemasonry in the connection with the Trilateral Commission and the other organizations like the CFR. You want me to interview myself? Tomorrow I'll interview myself. How's that?
Oh, Bob, I'm a real fan. You do very well.
Thank you very much, Bob. Okay. Let's say hello to... You know what amazes me? I want to share this with you because I think you have an appreciation for this. I tell the audience things. I tell them things that they would not know otherwise. And then months or years later, they will say, Why don't you tell the guy? Like I've been trying to keep it a secret, you know? Okay, let's say hello to Dan from Manhattan. Go ahead, Dan.
Hi, Bob.
Yes.
How are you doing?
All right, I guess.
I know you hate to hear that. I have a question for your guest.
Sure.
I've read a little bit of the literature in this conspiratorial genre. And one of my big issues with it is that people who write these kinds of books, they tend to use other writers in this field as footnotes. There's no real primary sources for any of this stuff. And a lot of these books can be traced back to one book. And the name of the book is called Tragedy and Hope by Carroll Quigley, who happened to be Bill Clinton's mentor at Georgetown. And I was wondering if your guest could speak a little bit about Quigley.
Yes, I'd be glad to. And by the way, I consulted more than 300 separate sources in writing Rule by Secrecy, and I tried to go with the ones that I felt like were the most credible and substantial sources. Admittedly, there's a lot of flaky writing out there about conspiracies, okay? You have to wade your way through it. Dr. Carroll Quigley, on the other hand, I think is a credible source. He was with George Washington University. As you said, he was the academic mentor to Bill Clinton, and he himself writes about the secret societies. And he writes about how that the Royal Institute of International Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations were the two branches that were created from the round tables. And he lays bare what they had, and he says because he had knowledge of their inner workings, because he had access to their working papers. In fact, what he actually said was that he really doesn't have any real objection to this globalization program of theirs. The only place he parted difference with the secret societies is that he thought that they were doing such spectacular work that they needed to be known to the public, and they wanted to remain secret.
Right, but if you remember, a lot of writers who use Quigley as a source take him out of context.
Well, it's not out of context. You can go to Tragedy and Hope, or he also wrote a companion piece about the history of the world, and he goes on for several pages about this. It's not just a few sentences pulled out of context.
I've actually read both of those. And if you go to page 950 of Tragedy and Hope, where a lot of this comes from, Dan quickly calls it a myth.
I tell you what, and even though he's slipping me a few folded bills under the table, I'm still going to tell you that with your interest and your obvious background here, you really should get Mr. Marr's book. And by the way, folks, you can get this book at a discount. You can get this book at a discount by calling on your website there, on your computer, the internet, www.wor710.com. I'll do that again, www.wor710.com. You can order the book at a discount if you do it that way. Can
I throw in a quote? Let me throw in another quote here, because I don't want people to think that I'm just some guy that sits around dreams up conspiracy theories. I've done my homework and I've checked it out, and one of the most disconcerting quotes I found was from Woodrow Wilson, of all people, who of course was intimately connected with these secret societies and was the presiding president when the Federal Reserve System was initiated, as well as the IRS. And he once wrote, he said, some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there's a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive that they'd better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. Now, that's Woodrow Wilson, and I feel like he's in a position to know what he's talking about.
Did he write that before or after his stroke?
He wrote that in 1913.
That was before his stroke.
Yeah, before his stroke.
You know, I read an interesting, perhaps revisionist history, that there are many learned historians who believe that the worst thing that happened in the 20th century, all things considered, was that England entered World War I, and because they entered World War I, France was not defeated quickly by Germany. Kaiser's Germany, folks, not Hitler's Germany. And that had Germany won World War I, there never would have been a Hitler. There never would have been World War II. What do you think of that?
Well, I point this out and quote from some world leaders that World War II, by most accounts, was simply an extension of World War I. And World War I, when you go back, you'll find was propagated by these very people and these very societies that I'm talking about. Now that, again, early on you asked me, well, and I hear people all the time, what's the relevance to us today? Well, if you had anybody in World War I, World War II, and the effect that those wars have had on us today, then you should be interested to know what was that all about. Let me take it even further back. I'm kind of a lay historian and a Civil War buff, I guess you could call it. And, of course, where I come from, they call it the war of between the states. But I was amazed to find that there is evidence that the war between the states, the American Civil War, and in fact, Otto von Bismarck himself said that the Civil War in the United States was planned years ahead of time by the financial powers of Europe. And there is substantial information, which I present in my book, Ruled by Secrecy, to show that that very well could be true.
I think at that point we better take a time out. And Agents Mulder and Scully, where are you when we need you? Straight ahead. Jeff in the car. Jeff, hello.
Hi there, Bob. Listen, I'd like to ask the author if he could comment about these two popular books that came out a few years ago about Holy Blood, Holy Grail, or Bloodline of the Holy Grail. And
right.
what you thought about them.
Yeah. Actually, that's some of the sources I consulted, and what you're going to find, and I know that these terms and words are just going to be meaningless to a lot of the audience, but yes, in Ruled by Secrecy, you're going to find that I tracked all this back through the Knights Templar to the Cathars, to the Merovingians, to the Priory of Sion. These are secret groups, secret societies, alternative versions of history that go all the way back there. And in fact, I realize that a lot of what I'm saying, a lot of people are going to take affront, or they're going to go, wait a minute, because I'm talking about information that most people don't get. We're all taught one thing, and often it's another. For example, if I was to ask, where did the name America come from? Bob, how did America get its name?
Every book that I've read said it was named after an Italian explorer by the name of Americus Vespucci.
That's wrong. That's right. That's what I was taught. That's what you were taught. That's what most of us were taught, but it's simply not true. That particular version came from a German monk by the name of Martin Walsemüller, who back about 1507 managed to get hold of a printing press. He knew that there had been a new land of America found, and he had heard of Amerigo Vespucci, so he simply put two and two together and said, well, it was named after the great Italian navigator Amerigo Vespucci. He later retracted that. But, of course, by then it was in print, and as we all know, if it's in a book, it's got to be true. And so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. We have these things that we're taught, we have these things we've heard, and what I'm trying to do is show that there's a hidden history that a lot of us have not heard about.
Let's say hello to Rich from Queens. Go ahead, Rich.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm a so-called Illuminati in the Rosicrucian Order, and that's all that is a mystical union with God. See, one can receive revelations from Supreme through the subconscious mind. And the reason why it's secret is because it's spiritual and not for discussion.
That's right. And I agree with the caller. That's what you find in studying the background and the history of the Rosicrucians and of the Illuminati. They basically can be tracked back to the early Gnostics, who said they received all of their knowledge directly from God.
Thank you very much, Rich. Let's say hello to Mark in New Haven, checking in right now on the Bob Grant program. What's on your mind, Mark?
Afternoon, gentlemen. I'd just like to say, Jim, I think you're right on target about what you're talking about in your book, and it's very valid, and there's a lot of truth in what you're saying. And I just want to also say that I think Hillary Clinton is the next Antichrist.
Well, I'm not going to stick my neck out on that one, but I will give you a little factoid. Hillary Clinton is the first American First Lady who has attended Bilderberg meetings, which is one of the most secret societies going, and the ones who is composed of the inner circle of these other secret societies, and the ones who most people point to as making the decisions that are affecting the path of the world progress.
Thank you very much, Mark. Let's go down to Atlantic City, home of the great Harry Hurley, and say hello to Eddie. Eddie, hello. Is Eddie there? He's gone. All right, let's try Gary in East Haven. Are you there, Gary?
How you doing, Bob? Hey, Jim, it's great to hear you on the radio again.
Thanks.
Hey, Jim, I don't want to give Bob a hard time, but he likes to hang up on people who mention the Illuminati. Now, according to your studies, wouldn't you say that the Illuminati, or at least the Illuminati, is visible in these front organizations such as the Council of Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, and the Trilaterals?
Well, yeah, in my study for Rule by Secrecy, if you'll track all that back, you'll find that a lot of the programs that these societies are pushing, such as a graduated income tax, a lot of things, basically can be found and tracked back to the Karl Marx and his Communist Manifesto, which seemed to be almost a verbatim recitation of the goals of the Bavarian Illuminati.
All right. Thank you very much, Gary. I wasn't aware that as soon as you mention Illuminati, I hang up. I'll have to remember that. I've got to remember that. Pavlov's dog, where are you? I mean, my heavens. You mentioned Illuminati, he hangs up. You said something about Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx seems to be the antithesis of David Rockefeller or any of the other magnates, capitalists of the world.
That's been one of the mysteries, and the thing that's thrown so many off during the 20th century is that, even Senator McCarthy kept talking about the communists in the State Department. Well, he didn't quite understand that the State Department since World War II had been just filled with Council on Foreign Relations people, and that back into the 1900s you find the very people who created the Council on Foreign Relations were the very same people who created communism. When the Russian Revolution broke out in 1917, Lenin wasn't there, was he? He was in Switzerland, and he was aided back into Russia by the German High Command and on the famous Seal Railroad car, and by one Max Warburg, who was head of the German Central Bank and a ranking member of German intelligence. And what people didn't understand was that his brother, Paul Warburg, helped found the Federal Reserve System in this country and was in charge of war bond sales during World War I. So you got the two brothers on both sides. What's with that? And Lenin then goes into Russia, takes over the revolution, creates communism with money and funding. Trotsky was in New York. He's sent off with thousands of dollars from Wall Street capitalists. Why would they be giving money to the communists since they vowed to destroy capitalism?
Well, Lenin said, we will hang the capitalist with the rope he will sell us. Let's take one final quick break. There, Bill.
Yes, I am, Bob.
Go ahead.
Just one. I'm a past master, been a Freemason for near 30 years. And my statement was why we are so-called secret. If everybody remembers when the Nazis in World War II and preceding that time, Hitler was annihilating them. But they survived. They had forget-me-not plants. They would plant in a home, and they would have a meeting there. And they survived through the Holocaust, through the Nazis, and continued on. And I find it really interesting that he would find us part of an international group to conspire to world domination. I really find that interesting.
Well, I think you've misconstrued what I've said. Let me say for about the sixth time now that most Masons in this country are fine, upstanding, honest people, okay? What I'm saying is it's been through Freemasonry that some of these secrets and some of this hidden knowledge has been passed along down through the centuries. I'd also like to just kind of wrap up here with a quote from the English philosopher Herbert Spencer, who said, "There is a principle which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all arguments, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. And that principle is contempt prior to investigation." So in other words, I don't expect anybody to believe me, and I certainly don't expect them to trust me, but if you will study the material, if you'll read Ruled by Secrecy and think about it, maybe it will point us the way.